First up, the 50th edition of the G7 meeting has commenced. Leaders of advanced economies are meeting for a three-day summit to discuss issues dominating the world at the moment. On the first day of the summit, the G7 leaders agreed to use frozen Russian assets to raise $50 billion for Ukraine to help it in its war against the Russian forces. The political agreement was the centerpiece of the opening day of the annual summit, attended for a second successive year by the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
I can confirm that we have reached a political agreement to provide additional financial support to Ukraine of about $50 billion by the end of the year through a loan mechanism for the repayment of which the extra profits from Russian assets tied up in our jurisdictions can be used. We are not talking about a confiscation of these assets, but of the interest that accrues over time.
Also at the summit, President Biden and his Ukrainian counterpart signed a 10-year bilateral security deal hailed by Kyiv as historic. The deal signed on the sidelines of the summit aims to commit future U.S. administrations to support Ukraine. Biden also sent a clear message to the Russian President Putin as well.
We've taken three major steps at the G7 that collectively show Putin he cannot wait us out. He cannot divide us. And we'll be with Ukraine until they prevail in this war.
Ukraine has signed a 10-year security agreement with Japan as well on the sidelines of the summit. Furthermore, the Ukrainian president met with the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. During their meeting, the UK announced new sanctions designed to degrade Russia's ability to wage war in Ukraine. Sunak reiterated UK's support for Ukraine. He said they will always stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine in its fight for freedom. Italy also hosted a session focused on investments and infrastructure projects in Africa. Projects include a rail corridor that will connect southern and central Africa. It also aims to bring telecommunication cables and other infrastructure to the region. The infrastructure investments are meant to serve as an alternative to China's development efforts, which the US and its allies say China uses to exert influence on developing nations. Now, on day two of the summit, various topics expected to be on the agenda are the war in Gaza, migration, the economic security and artificial intelligence issues. Moreover, Pope Francis is set to become the first pontiff to attend the G7 summit. He will be addressing the subject of artificial intelligence at the conference. He has previously called for global regulation of AI, warning of its dangers to ethics and to human rights. And for more on this, we're now being joined by correspondent Valentina Donato, live from Italy. And Valentina, now we believe that Prime Minister Modi, of course, is also meeting world leaders there. What is supposed to be his engagement for the day today?
Today, Prime Minister Modi will participate at the G7 summit. This will be his first overseas trip as the newly elected Prime Minister and India's 11th time participating to the summit. This shows the recognition and contribution of the efforts that India has been making in trying to resolve global challenges, including those of peace, security, development, and environmental preservation. Modi's participation also provides an opportunity to follow up on outcomes of the G20 summit held under India's presidency last year and deliberate on issues which are significant for the global South. Modi will have bilateral meetings with Pope Francis and US President Biden. He and Pope Francis share the same position on wars, that diplomacy and peace is the only solution. Just yesterday, as Prime Minister Modi arrived, he wrote on X, "Together, we aim to address global challenges and foster international cooperation for a brighter future."
Right, and Valentina, what is going to dominate day two of the G7 summit? Remember, yesterday we saw two major decisions on funding and a deal that the Americans also announced.
And today, leaders plan to tackle the topic of migration, seeking ways to combat trafficking and increase investment in countries from where migrants start out on often what we have seen as life-threatening journeys. Topics today will focus on finance, support for Ukraine, the war in Gaza, artificial intelligence and climate change, as well as China's industrial policy and economic security.
And well, the funding for Ukraine, what sort of message has that sent the Kremlin?
Well, yesterday, two major deals were reached, with the G7 leaders agreeing on loaning Ukraine $50 billion. Biden and Zelensky also signed a 10-year bilateral security agreement to ensure help to Kyiv to defend against Russia's invasion. U.S. President Biden said, "We are not backing down. In fact, we are standing together against this illegal aggression." This is certainly a major win for President Biden ahead of the upcoming U.S. elections, but it is also a powerful sign that the G7 is still aligned despite the recent wave of the right in Europe.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.